The smell of tempera paint and little kid dreams filled my classroom, a familiar, comforting scent. I was helping Leo, my resident dinosaur expert, navigate the perilous task of giving a T-Rex purple spots, when my phone buzzed on the art table, vibrating next to a pot of glue. Date with Andy. 7 p.m. The reminder sent a familiar, fluttering anxiety through my stomach. I looked down at my comfy, paint-splattered smock and then at the clock. Just enough time to rush home, change, and transform from Ms. Kelly, who could tie 20 shoelaces in under a minute, into Kelly, the woman dating a man who probably had someone else tie his shoes for him. 2 hours later, I sat in a restaurant so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. The walls were draped in dark silk, and the tables were so far apart each couple seemed to be in their own private universe. I smoothed down the skirt of my simple sundress, feeling wildly out of place. It was cheerful and yellow, a daisy in a field of orchids. Andy was late. Not fashionably late, but importantly late. A text had blinked in 15 minutes ago, server outage. Apologies. 15 minutes. I sipped my ice water and tried not to feel small. When he finally arrived, it was with a gust of cool energy. He moved through the room like he owned it, and for all I knew, he did. He was handsome in a way that felt more like a statement than a fact, all sharp lines and an expensive, dark suit. "Kelly, I am so sorry," he said, his voice a low hum as he sat. He leaned in to give me a quick, perfunctory kiss on the cheek, but his phone was already vibrating on the table between us like an angry insect. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Under control," he said, but his eyes were already flicking to the screen. He took the call, holding up a finger. "Yes, I'm looking at it now." "No, that's a band-aid solution. I need the root cause analysis in the next hour." I watched him, this force of nature. For the next 20 minutes, I was an audience of one to a performance of his life. A video call with a panicked executive in another time zone, a flurry of texts, the constant glow of his smartwatch feeding him data. I nibbled on a breadstick and felt the last of my hopeful anticipation curdle into a quiet resignation. This was a mistake. I was a placeholder, a calendar entry. And then, just as the main course arrived, he picked up his phone, powered it completely off, and slid it into his jacket pocket. He placed the jacket on the empty chair beside him. The silence that followed was deafening. He finally looked at me, and it was like a lighthouse beam locking onto a ship in the fog. His entire focus, which had been scattered across the globe, settled on me. The intensity was almost physical. "I'm sorry," he repeated, but this time, he meant it. "The world demands a lot of me. It's incessant." I managed a small smile. "I noticed. I have a theory about that, you know." A confident, almost challenging smile touched his lips. "Oh? Do enlighten me." I tried to keep my tone light, but my heart was doing a funny little dance. "I call it the 1% rule." He said it with the gravity of someone announcing a scientific breakthrough. "Realistically, I can only give about 1% of my attention, my time, my mental capacity, to anything outside of my work." I blinked, the number hanging in the air between us, cold and clinical. 1%. It felt like a confirmation of my worst fears. I opened my mouth to say something sharp, but he held up a hand. "But," he continued, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming, 1% of me is more than 100% from most men. My 1% is fully present, fully engaged, and entirely yours. It's a quality over quantity proposition." I burst out laughing. I couldn't help it. It was the most arrogant, ridiculous, and strangely compelling thing I had ever heard. "You cannot be serious. You've actually quantified it." "Completely serious," he said, not a trace of humor in his eyes, though his smile widened. "Is it so arrogant? For the next 2 hours, you have my complete, undivided attention. No phones, no interruptions. Ask me anything. Tell me anything. I'm listening. Prove me wrong." So, I did. I decided to test his theory. I told him about Leo and the purple-spotted T-Rex. I told him about the great glitter crisis of last week and how I'd found specks of it in my hair for days. I waited for his eyes to glaze over, for that subtle shift in posture that meant he was bored. It never came. He listened, his chin resting on his steepled fingers. He asked questions. "Why purple? Was it an aesthetic choice or a scientific one?" He laughed, a real, warm sound that transformed his face, when I described trying to get glitter out of the classroom hamster. He remembered a tiny, offhand comment I'd made in a text days ago about my favorite childhood book, and he quoted a line from it. The 2 hours flew by. He wasn't just hearing me, he was absorbing me. It was the most exhilarating conversation I'd ever had. He was brilliant, yes, but he was also witty and surprisingly self-deprecating when he talked about his early failures. I wasn't just dating a billionaire, I was connecting with a man whose mind was a fascinating, chaotic place I desperately wanted to explore. He paid the bill, despite my offer to split it, which he dismissed with a gentle, my rule, my treat, and walked me to my door. The night air was cool, and the city lights twinkled around us like a stolen constellation. Thank you for a wonderful evening, Kelly, he said, his voice soft. The intense CEO was gone, replaced by someone quieter, more genuine. Thank you for the 2 hours, I said, smiling. It was a very high-quality 1%. He smiled back, a slow, devastating curve of his lips. He cupped my face in his hands, his touch surprisingly gentle. Then my theory holds. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a polite goodnight kiss. It was a kiss that held the full, concentrated force of that promised 1%. It was focused, intentional, and utterly consuming. It was the kind of kiss that rewrites your memory, that makes you forget every other kiss that came before it. My head spun, and my fingers curled into the lapels of his jacket, holding on for dear life. When he pulled away, my breath was shaky. He brushed a thumb over my cheek. Good night, Kelly. I watched him walk back to his obscenely expensive car, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I floated into my apartment, leaning against the closed door, the ghost of his kiss still on my lips. But later, as I lay in the dark, the giddy high began to fade, replaced by a slow, creeping chill. 1%. The number echoed in the silence. That kiss, that conversation, had been a banquet. But a banquet you only get to attend once in a while is just a beautiful memory. What about the countless, ordinary Tuesdays? What about the simple, boring, beautiful 99% of life? Was I signing up for a series of spectacular moments, while the real, messy, wonderful stuff of life happened without him? The thought was a cold splash of reality. I had just experienced the most captivating date of my life, and I was already worried I was going to die of thirst in the middle of a feast. For 3 months, I lived inside a whirlwind made of gold leaf and perfect moments. Andy's 1% was a drug, and I was a willing addict. There was the Tuesday he showed up at my apartment after a grueling day of meltdowns and misplaced glue sticks, took one look at my tired face, and simply said, "Come on." An hour later, we were soaring in a helicopter over the city lights, a picnic basket of decadent food between us. He gave me 2 hours of a sky full of stars, his undivided attention making me feel like the only person in the world. There was the weekend he booked an entire, hushed library room for us, just because I'd mentioned I missed the smell of old books. He didn't work. He just sat with me, his focus so absolute as we read in comfortable silence that I could feel it like a physical warmth. He analyzed my dreams of one day opening a small, progressive preschool with the same razor-sharp precision he'd used to dismantle a business rival's proposal, offering insights that were terrifyingly brilliant. It was incredible. And it was starving me. The hunger pangs started small. A text left on read for 8 hours. A cancelled movie night because of an emergency stakeholder call. I told myself this was the deal. I had signed up for the banquet, and I couldn't complain about the crumbs in between. But my heart, it seemed, hadn't read the fine print. The spring fair was my sanctuary. It was the chaotic, beautiful, messy heart of my world. The squeals of children on the rickety homemade carnival games, the scent of popcorn and sunscreen, the proud display of lopsided clay pots and splotchy watercolor paintings, this was my 99%. And he had promised. I wouldn't miss it, he'd said 2 nights ago, during one of our perfect, focused dinners, his hand covering mine. I want to see your kingdom. The day dawned bright and clear. I was there at dawn with the other teachers, stringing up fairy lights and inflating what felt like 1,000 balloons. My stomach was a knot of giddy nerves. All morning, I kept checking my phone, expecting a text, a "good luck," or "on my way." Nothing. By 1 o'clock, when the fair was in full, glorious swing, the knot had tightened into a cold, hard stone. Leo tugged on my yellow sundress, the same one from our first date, his face smeared with cotton candy. "Miss Kelly, is your boyfriend coming? You said he was super tall." He's trying, Leo, I said, my voice too bright. I manned the cupcake stand, forcing a smile as I handed out frosting top treats to my students and their parents. Every time a tall man entered the gate, my heart leapt into my throat, only to sink back down. The noise of the fair, usually so joyful, began to feel like a taunt. I was surrounded by families, by partners handing each other lemonades and wiping their kids' faces, a living tapestry of shared, ordinary life. And I was alone. At 3 o'clock, my phone finally buzzed. The screen lit up with his name. My hands, sticky with frosting, fumbled to open it. Critical merger negotiation. Can't break away. Sending my deepest apologies. We'll make it up to you. The words were so sterile, so corporate. We'll make it up to you. The phrase felt like a currency he used to settle debts. The stone in my stomach turned to ice. This wasn't a cancelled dinner. This was my world, and he had deemed it non-critical. The rest of the fair passed in a blur of cheerful noise and personal silence. By the time I helped sweep up the last of the popcorn and deflate the balloons, a quiet, solid anger had replaced the hurt. This wasn't about the 1% rule anymore. This was about a broken promise. I didn't go home. I went to his high-rise, the doorman nodding me through with a sympathetic look that only fueled my fury. His assistant, a perpetually flustered young woman named Maya, was still at her desk outside his apartment. He's in a zone, Kelly, she whispered, wringing her hands. He told me not to disturb him. I'll disturb him, I said, my voice calm but leaving no room for argument. I pushed the heavy door open to his apartment. It was silent, a stark contrast to the joyful chaos I'd just left. And there he was, in the glass-walled home office, illuminated by the cool blue light of multiple monitors. He wasn't on a video call. He wasn't surrounded by a tense boardroom. He was alone, wearing a faded college sweatshirt, his fingers flying across a keyboard, a half-eaten sandwich forgotten at his elbow. The critical merger negotiation was a line of code on a screen. He was in the flow, the world forgotten. Me, forgotten. You were here the whole time? The question came out quiet, laced with a hurt so profound it barely had sound. He startled, spinning in his ergonomic chair. His eyes were wide, unfocused for a second, blinking as he re-entered the real world. Kelly? What time is it? The spring fair is over, I said, my voice gaining strength, fueled by the image of him sitting here, lost in his own head, while I stood alone at a cupcake stand. You promised. The kids asked where you were. He ran a hand through his already messy hair, a flicker of genuine guilt crossing his face before it was replaced by defensiveness. The deal, it hit a massive snag. The entire system architecture was flawed. I had to focus, to rebuild it from the ground up. I said I'd make it up to you. We can do anything you want tomorrow. The excuse, the placation, was the final straw. This isn't about the fair, Andy. The words burst out of me, sharp and broken. It's about your stupid, clinical 1% rule. I don't want a helicopter ride tomorrow. I don't want a private chef. I wanted you to eat a slightly stale, overfrosted cupcake with me in a noisy, messy schoolyard today. I wanted you to see Leo's painting and laugh at the terrible magic trick the principal performed. I wanted the boring, mundane, 99%. And you don't have that to give. You don't even see its value. I was crying now, hot, angry tears I didn't bother to wipe away. He just stared at me, his face a mask of confusion, as if I was speaking a language he couldn't parse. Kelly, that's not fair, he began, his voice tight. What I offer you is a curated experience. I shot back. It's not a shared life. It's a performance. And I'm tired of being an audience member. I turned and walked out of the sterile, silent apartment, my heart hammering against my ribs. I paused at the doorway, looking back at him, this brilliant man sitting in the dark, surrounded by his artificial light. Your 1% is a banquet, Andy, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to suck all the sound from the room. But I'm starting to realize I'm dying of thirst. I didn't slam the door. I closed it with a soft, final click, the sound more definitive than any scream. The elevator ride down was a descent back into my own reality, a world that was messy and imperfect and real. And for the first time, it felt like enough. The silence that followed was a physical presence in my small apartment. A week passed, each day a slow, aching echo of the last. My phone was a brick on my coffee table. It never lit up with his name. A part of me, the weak, lovesick part, had hoped it would. That he'd storm in with some grand, logical argument or an impossibly romantic gesture that would sweep my reservations away. But the other part, the part that had stood alone at the cupcake stand, was relieved. His silence was its own answer. It proved my point. I was a problem he couldn't code his way out of, so he'd simply closed the program. I threw myself back into my world. The messy, beautiful, unoptimized chaos of my classroom was a bomb. We were building volcanoes from baking soda and vinegar that week, and the joyful shrieks as they erupted were a potent medicine. This was real. This was a life lived at 100%. On Tuesday morning, I arrived early, as always, to set up the day's activities. The hallway was quiet, the only sound the hum of the fluorescent lights. But as I approached my classroom door, I sensed a strange, waiting stillness from the other side. I pushed the door open. And the world tilted. He was there. Andy. Standing in the middle of my vibrant, paper-plastered, crayon-cluttered kingdom. He was wearing dark jeans and a simple gray t-shirt, looking more out of place than an astronaut at a tea party. He wasn't holding a phone. He wasn't wearing a watch. His hands were empty, hanging awkwardly at his sides. And he was surrounded. A semicircle of my 24 5-year-olds had him cornered by the reading rug, staring up at him with unabashed, wide-eyed curiosity. He looked terrified. Not in a boardroom fight kind of way, but in a genuine, heart-stopping, I have no protocol for this kind of way. My breath caught. What are you doing here? All the little heads swiveled towards me, but Andy's gaze remained locked on mine, a desperate, hopeful anchor in a sea of tiny, judging faces. He took a shaky breath. I'm recalibrating the system. The words were so him, yet everything else was so not. I just stared, my teacher's bag slipping from my shoulder onto a nearby chair. The 1% rule, he continued, his voice low but clear in the hushed room, was a stupid algorithm written by a man who was afraid of failing at the one thing he couldn't code. He gestured weakly to the children around him, a silent, living embodiment of everything his old life excluded. This is the 99%. It's messy. It's unpredictable. It's loud. And it's terrifying, honestly. But it's real. He took a step toward me, carefully navigating around a pile of wooden blocks. You were right. I was offering you a curated experience, not a shared life. So, I'm here to learn. He reached down and picked up a well-loved picture book from the rug, holding it like it was a fragile, ancient artifact. Leo, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle as he looked at the little boy, informed me that I have to read this with voices. He looked back at me, his eyes wide with a vulnerability I had never seen in them before. I have no idea how to do that. Will you help me? My heart shattered and rebuilt itself in the space of a single heartbeat. The arrogance was gone. The CEO was gone. All that was left was a man, humbling himself in a room full of crayons, for me. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, my vision blurring with tears. The next 20 minutes were the most awkward, corny, and profoundly beautiful of my life. Andy sat in my tiny reading chair, his large frame making it look like doll furniture. I sat on the rug with the kids, who immediately snuggled into me. He opened the book, about a lost little bear, and began to read. His voice was flat at first, a monotonous recitation of facts. The bear was sad. Leo piped up, no. He's not sad, he's so sad. Like this. Leo made an exaggerated pouty face. Andy looked at me, panicked. I gave him a small, encouraging smile. He cleared his throat and tried again. The bear was so sad. His attempt at a voice was gruff and ridiculous, but it was an attempt. The kids giggled. Not a mean giggle, but a delighted one. He gained a little confidence. The gruff voice for the bear, a squeaky one for a mouse he met. He was terrible at it. Absolutely terrible. But he was trying. He was fully, completely, gloriously present in his failure. I watched him, this man who commanded boardrooms, fumble through a children's story for me, and I felt a love so fierce and overwhelming it stole my breath. This was worth more than 1,000 helicopter rides. This was his soul, offered to me without a filter. As the story ended and the kids clapped, the school day began in earnest. He didn't leave. He stayed. He helped pour juice, getting more on the table than in the cups. He tried to build a block tower with a little girl named Chloe, which immediately toppled over, making her shriek with laughter. He was a disaster. He was perfect. During nap time, when the room was finally quiet save for the soft sounds of sleeping children, we stood by the window overlooking the playground. "I've delegated the majority of my operational control," he said quietly, his shoulder brushing mine. "I'm still the visionary, but I'm no longer the machine. I was so scared of failing you that I built a wall. I'm tearing it down, Kelly. Brick by brick." I looked up at him, at the faint smear of grape juice on his t-shirt, at the tired but peaceful look in his eyes. "The 1% rule is officially deprecated?" I asked, a soft smile touching my lips. He turned to face me fully, taking both my hands in his. "Completely. I'm rebooting with a new core directive, Kelly first." He gave a wry, self-deprecating smile. "It might have some bugs. I'll probably still get absorbed in a problem sometimes. I can't promise I'll never miss a cupcake again. But I will always, always come back to you. You are my new priority one." It wasn't a promise of perfection. It was a promise of presence. It was the one thing I'd truly wanted all along. "Okay," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Okay." He leaned in, and this kiss was nothing like our first. That one had been a statement of intent. This one was a question, a promise, and a homecoming all at once. It was soft and searching, filled with the quiet vulnerability of a shared future, not the intense focus of a single moment. It tasted of grape juice and hope. When we broke apart, a small, sleepy voice from a nap mat said, "Miss Kelly, are you and the tall man sharing germs?" We both laughed, a real, joyful sound that mingled with the afternoon sun streaming through the window. He laced his fingers through mine, and we stood together, surrounded by the quiet evidence of my world, a world he was no longer just visiting, but was finally, truly, learning to live in.